My son was always my mirror. Every laugh of his was a reflection of my happiness, and every curious question seemed like an invitation to explore the world together. Noah was the kind of child who spoke with shining eyes, who ran through the house as if each room held a new treasure. But something began to change. First, there were the long pauses before answering. Then, the complete silence. And always, without fail, this silence would appear when she entered the room. My wife, his mother, Laura. Little by little, I realized that my son ceased to exist when she was around. At first, I tried to fool myself. I thought it was just tiredness, or maybe a problem at school. Laura said he was going through a phase that all children change. But Noah's gaze screamed for something he didn't know how to say. His eyes avoided mine. His shoulders were always hunched, as if carrying an invisible weight. I started observing more closely, counting the minutes of silence, measuring the glances exchanged. That's when I noticed a pattern. When Laura left, he went back to being himself. It was subtle, but it was there, and it ate away at me. That night, Laura said she needed to leave to take care of something urgent. Late at night, without a clear explanation. There was something in her tone, something cold, almost rehearsed. I waited a few minutes and decided to follow her. It wasn't a rational decision. It was instinctive. Something inside me screamed that something was wrong, that I needed to know to protect my son. The road seemed darker than usual that night, and I had no idea that what I would see would change everything. The life I thought I had never really existed. Before continuing, comment below which city and country you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Noah had always been an observant child, but what stood out most about him was his energy, that desire to talk about everything, to share every detail of his day. It was common for him to meet me at the door when I got home from work, talking nonstop about what he had learned at school, the games he had invented, or the crazy dreams from the night before. But that month, something changed. It started with a simple murmured, "Hi," then a look at the floor, and finally, absolute silence. At first, I thought he was just tired or sick. But when I realized that this silence only appeared when Laura entered the room, discomfort grew within me. The first time I really noticed it was on an ordinary afternoon. I was on the sofa, and Noah, excitedly, was drawing something to show me. He spoke enthusiastically, pencil in hand and a glint in his eyes. But as soon as Laura appeared in the hallway, he stopped, as if someone had turned off his energy. The pencil fell from his hand. He sat up straight and remained silent. It wasn't obvious fear. It was a strange tension, as if he were expecting something bad to happen. Laura just looked at him and asked what he was doing. He replied softly, "Nothing." That gave me a chill that I couldn't explain. I confronted Laura that night. I asked if she had noticed anything different about Noah. She shrugged and said he was going through a common phase for his age. "Children change," she said, but the way she said it, too cold. There wasn't a hint of concern. I pressed her, but she turned the conversation against me, saying I was exaggerating and seeing things where there weren't any. The discussion ended with her leaving the room and slamming the door, and I was left there, with a bitter taste in my mouth and a growing doubt in my chest. The next day, Noah had a nightmare and came running to my room. He was trembling all over, sweating, and repeatedly saying he didn't want to hear that anymore. I tried to ask him what was wrong, but he just shook his head. Laura appeared minutes later, saying it was normal, that I was spoiling him too much, that it was just a dream. But my instinct screamed, it wasn't just a dream. Something was wrong, and it was becoming increasingly clear. I started observing the details, how he moved away when she approached, how he became alert at any louder sound coming from her, how he avoided his own mother. It was at that point that I started writing everything down. Small behaviors, reactions, casual comments. I needed to understand what was happening. My mind tried to deny it, refused to believe that there was something darker behind that dynamic. But my heart already knew. It was as if two versions of the truth were fighting inside me. And in the midst of this internal conflict, I started planning. I couldn't accuse without proof, but I also couldn't ignore it anymore. And the night Laura left home without explanation was the chance I needed. I couldn't hesitate any longer. I followed her car, keeping a safe distance. The streets were empty and each traffic light seemed to last an eternity. I didn't know what to expect, but something inside me told me it wasn't just a simple trip to the pharmacy as she had said. Laura drove for about 20 minutes until she reached a more secluded area of the city, where there were few streetlights and silence reigned. She parked near an old warehouse and got out of the car as if she knew exactly where she was going. I kept my car at a distance, almost with the lights off, watching, and then he appeared. A man, perhaps her age, emerged from the shadows and approached Laura. They greeted each other quickly, without touching, and began to talk. The distance prevented me from hearing clearly, but the tone was tense, quick gestures, glances around, as if they knew they were doing something wrong. That's when I heard a fragment of a sentence from the man. "He needs to stay quiet." My hair stood on end. Laura replied with something I didn't understand, but soon after he said, "If he talks, we lose everything." My stomach churned. They were talking about Noah. It had to be. I stood there, paralyzed, not knowing whether to move forward or backward. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing. Why were they talking like that about our son? What was she hiding from me? Why would a stranger talk about keeping my son quiet? The questions hammered in my head, and everything I knew about my wife began to crumble. I waited until they said goodbye. She returned to the car with the same expression as always, cold, almost robotic. And at that moment I knew this couldn't be ignored. I got home before her and found Noah asleep. I sat beside the bed and watched that little face which, even at peace, seemed to carry an enormous weight. The image of Laura talking to that man wouldn't leave my mind. I started to remember moments from the past, situations where Noah seemed strange, but which I had let pass. The days he cried for no reason, the drawings he scribbled with dark figures. Was he trying to tell me something all along and I didn't see it? Guilt began to grow inside me. The next morning I bought a small recorder and hid it in one of Noah's toys. I needed proof. I needed to understand what happened when I wasn't around. I took Noah to school, kissed him, and went home pretending I'd forgotten something. Laura was on the phone. She seemed annoyed, but when she saw me, she smiled. A fake, disconnected smile. I pretended everything was normal, but my heart was at war. That night in the shed had been the turning point. I knew I was getting into something dark, but I needed to keep going. For him. The first few hours after installing the recorder were the longest of my life. I spent the entire day at work with my mind elsewhere, trying to mask my anxiety. Every notification on my phone made me jump out of my chair, imagining what might be happening at home. When I finally returned, everything seemed normal. Laura was preparing dinner. Noah was quiet in his room, and the atmosphere felt forced. There was something artificial in every gesture of hers, as if she were staging a perfect routine to convince me that nothing was wrong. But deep down, I already knew. That calm was just the surface of something terribly rotten. I waited until Laura fell asleep and went to Noah's room. He was fast asleep, clutching a teddy bear. I approached slowly, took the toy from the bedside table, and accessed the recorder. My hands were trembling so much I almost dropped the device. I pressed play, and for a few seconds I only heard silence and footsteps. Then, her voice. Laura. Cold, impatient, different from the woman I thought I knew. "Do you understand what happens if you tell Daddy anything?" she said. Noah's voice came right after, trembling, almost inaudible. "I won't tell. I promise." I froze. Each word was a blade. I kept listening, unable to stop. She continued her speech, threatening, belittling, accusing her own son of ruining everything. "You make me nervous, Noah. It's your fault when things get bad here. If you behaved, none of this would happen." That cruel tone, devoid of empathy, was like poison poured into the heart of the house. My whole body trembled. I turned off the recorder and remained silent, listening to the sound of my own uneven breathing. The world seemed to spin, and a painful truth began to take hold within me. I had slept next to a woman who terrorized our son. I spent the rest of the night awake, sitting on the floor of Noah's room, watching him sleep. Every time he stirred, I remembered her words. It was impossible to reconcile the image of the loving mother with the cruel voice in the recordings. I wanted to scream, wake her up, demand answers. But something told me to wait. I needed to act cautiously. If she was capable of saying those things, what guarantee did she not do something worse if confronted unprepared? Noah's protection came first. I needed solid proof. I needed to understand how far this would go. In the following days, I repeated the process. I recorded everything, and the more I listened, the more my stomach churned. There were moments when she completely ignored his crying, others when she screamed for nothing. And worst of all, there were long pauses, that kind of silence that isn't calm, it's fear. I began to see Noah in a different light, the way he hesitated before speaking, how he looked at me with a silent plea for help. I had failed him, but not anymore. I promised right then and there that I would never let her hurt him again. I decided to seek help outside the home. I couldn't face this alone. I took the recordings to a trusted lawyer, someone I'd known since college. He listened attentively, and when he finished, his expression was one of pure shock. He said that this was more than enough to initiate legal proceedings and protect Noah immediately. But he also warned, any misstep could jeopardize everything. We needed to act strategically, involve Child Protective Services, and ensure Laura didn't have the chance to manipulate the situation. I nodded. Inside, I burned with the desire to get her out of the house that very night. While the plan was being put together, I received a call from the school. The psychologist, Ms. Green, said you wanted to speak with me urgently. She said Noah had been exhibiting worrying behavior, withdrawn, avoiding contact with adults, and recently he had started drawing frightening figures, always a large woman with red eyes and an open mouth, screaming at a child huddled in a corner. My heart froze. I asked to speak with her in person that same day. When I arrived, she showed me the drawings and described scenes that perfectly matched what I already knew. It was as if Noah was crying out for help through the colors and the paper. The conversation with the psychologist gave me the final confirmation that I needed to act fast. She suspected emotional abuse but didn't have concrete proof. When I showed her the recordings, she was silent for a few seconds, processing. Then she looked at me with a heavy expression and said, "You need to protect your son immediately. This won't stop on its own." I went home determined. But upon entering, I found something that made me stop at the door. Laura was smiling at Noah while preparing dinner, as if she were the perfect mother. It made me nauseous. That night, I asked Noah to sleep in my room. I said I wanted to have a boys' night, like we used to. He smiled, relieved, and snuggled up next to me. I waited until he was asleep to go back to the recorder. More excerpts, more verbal violence, more subtle threats. She said things like, "Your father doesn't believe you, and if you tell, it will only make things worse." The malice was all there, in the subtext, in the silences, in the heavy sighs. It was a calculated manipulation, almost rehearsed. And with each new sentence, the image I had of Laura crumbled a little more. The next day, I did what needed to be done. I scheduled a meeting with social services and handed over all the necessary materials. I recorded my statement, making it clear that my priority was protecting my son. They acted quickly. In less than 24 hours, a temporary restraining order was issued, allowing me to keep Noah with me and preventing Laura from having any contact with him until the case was reviewed. When she arrived home and saw the notification on the door, she exploded. She screamed, kicked, and called me crazy. But it was too late. Justice was finally being served. And most importantly, Noah was safe. Laura's reaction was exactly as I feared, and at the same time exactly as I needed to see. It was in that outburst, in that desperate cry of lost control, that she revealed her true face. She tried to force her way into the house, yelling that I was manipulating her, that it was all a conspiracy. But the officers were already informed, and they escorted her off the property. Noah watched the scene from the bedroom window. He didn't say a word, but he held my hand so tightly that his nails left marks on my skin. There, without needing to say anything, he thanked me for protecting him. In the following days, Noah began to change. Subtly but noticeably. He started talking more, smiling discreetly, asking to play in the yard. The shadow that hung over him was still there, but it wasn't as heavy anymore. I started the process of finding specialized therapy for him, and with Mrs. Green's support, we managed to get him an emergency appointment. The new psychologist, specializing in childhood trauma, confirmed everything. Noah had developed classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress. He no longer trusted his own voice. He was afraid of being punished for expressing himself. The damage was done, but there was hope for reconstruction. While Noah was taking his first steps toward recovery, Laura hired a lawyer and tried to reverse the narrative. She alleged parental alienation, persecution, even mental health issues on my part. But none of that held up against the recordings, the psychological reports, the school testimonies. Even so, the process was exhausting. Each hearing was a battlefield where I had to prove again and again that my son was telling the truth, even without speaking. The system isn't designed to act quickly, and often doubt outweighs the facts. But I remained firm. For Noah. For justice. Amidst all of this, the figure of the mysterious man resurfaced. The investigation revealed that he was a former colleague of Laura's, someone with whom she had been involved in the past. What we discovered was disturbing. He had already been accused of abuse in another context, but the case was dismissed for lack of evidence. It wasn't clear to what extent he was involved in the situation with Noah, but his conversations with Laura demonstrated, at the very least, a toxic complicity. Their connection became another piece in the puzzle of the truth, and the more I discovered, the more I wondered how I hadn't seen it before. Despite everything, the worst part wasn't facing justice, nor dealing with Laura's lies. The hardest part was looking at Noah and knowing he would carry those scars for a long time. Every time he hesitated before speaking, every time he was startled by a louder tone of voice, it was as if I relived all the terror he had endured. But now, at least, he had space to heal, and I would be by his side every step of the way, no matter what. His silence had lasted too long. It was time to give him back the voice that had been taken from him. Therapy sessions began to reveal what Noah couldn't put into words. In drawings, in short, scattered phrases, he began to describe an environment of constant fear. He recounted how he would stay silent so as not to wake the monster, as he called Laura, in her moments of anger. The psychologist explained to me that he had developed a kind of survival mechanism. Becoming invisible was the way he found to protect himself. Each new revelation was like a punch to the gut. And yet, I felt relief, because he was finally able to speak. In one of those sessions, Noah recounted how Laura used to threaten him with things only he knew. Secrets she extracted from him during vulnerable moments and then used as ammunition. If you tell, no one will believe you. They'll say you're a liar like Grandpa. The psychologist told me this indicated an old pattern, perhaps something learned in her childhood. But knowing this didn't bring me comfort. Because in the end, trauma can't be explained. It's felt. And my son was feeling it too much for too long. It was time to cut any ties that could bring him back to that cycle. Based on the accumulated evidence, I filed for full custody. The process was intense, drawn out, and full of attempts by Laura's defense to distort the facts. She claimed to be the victim of a conspiracy, asserting that Noah had been indoctrinated by me to lie. She tried to cry during depositions, staged crises, but the coldness of the recordings and the consistency of Noah's behavior in front of the professionals dismantled every attempt. The judge was cautious, but little by little, the scales began to tip in our favor. The truth, when upheld with courage, has a strange way of asserting itself. During that time, I needed to be more than a father. I was his therapist, lawyer, night watchman, cook, storyteller, and above all, his safe haven. There were nights when Noah would wake up screaming and all I could do was hug him until he fell asleep again. On others, he would stay silent for hours, just drawing. But the trust between us grew. He started calling me my shield, and although it was a childish expression, it carried a weight that broke me inside. Because deep down I knew. For a while I hadn't been, but now I would be. Always. The final hearing was scheduled for a rainy morning. Noah stayed with my sister while I made my way to the courthouse. Laura was there, dressed in white, as if she wanted to appear pure. When we looked at each other, I saw an emptiness in her eyes. No regret, no shadow of empathy, only anger at having lost control. The judge was direct to the point. He read the reports, listened to the experts, analyzed the evidence. And then he declared full custody to the father, with complete suspension of any maternal visitation until further evaluation. I closed my eyes for a second. The battle was far from over, but this was a victory, and it was only the beginning. Returning home that day was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just the feeling of a legal victory. It was as if the air inside the house had finally changed. For the first time in months, Noah ran through the living room, still shy, but with a sparkle in his eyes that I thought was lost forever. I prepared his favorite lunch, and while we ate, he looked at me and said, "Now can I tell you everything?" I didn't answer with words. I just opened my arms, and he came running. In that hug, we sealed a silent pact. He could indeed tell me everything, and I would listen, always. In the days that followed, we began to build a new routine. Small things, like choosing together what to watch at night, playing castle games, or even cooking pancakes on Saturdays, became healing rituals. Every time Noah expressed himself without fear, it was as if he recovered a little piece of himself. But it wasn't all roses. There were still relapses, days when he would withdraw, when he would ask again if his mother was coming back. The psychologist helped us deal with these moments, teaching us that healing is not a straight line. It's a path with curves, falls, and restarts. One of the most poignant moments was when Noah gave me a drawing. It was of him and me, holding a golden shield with the phrase, "Daddy protects from the dark." I couldn't hold back the tears. It was more than just a drawing. It was the embodiment of his trust in me. After everything, after the silence, the fear, the pain, he still saw me as his hero, and that renewed me. It gave me the strength to keep facing what was still to come, because even with custody guaranteed, I knew that Laura's shadow still loomed over us, ready to try to return. And she tried. Sometime later, her lawyer filed a request for review of the decision, alleging significant improvements in her emotional state. But now, we were prepared. With the support of the therapist, the school, the lawyer, and, above all, the truth Noah had experienced, we managed to block any attempt at reconciliation. The judge firmly decreed that any contact could only occur with medical authorization and judicial supervision. And even then, it would be up to Noah to decide when and if he wanted that contact. When I told him this, he simply said, "I don't want any more lies in my ears." It was the response of someone who was finally free. Over time, I began to discreetly share our story with other parents. I discovered that many harbored similar doubts, silences they ignored, signs they preferred not to see. And the more I spoke, the more I realized. A child's silence is almost never neutral. It's always a language. Sometimes a muffled cry, sometimes a raised shield, but always a plea. What if I had ignored it? What if he had believed Laura's excuses? That question haunted me, but looking at Noah playing in the yard, I understood that what mattered wasn't the time lost, but the time recovered, and that no one could take away from us. Today, Noah has a different look in his eyes. He's still the same sweet and curious boy, but now there's something more in his eyes. A kind of precocious maturity, a silent wisdom that no child should possess. He still goes to therapy, and some days are harder than others, but the difference is visible. He talks. He laughs. He tells me school secrets and hugs me out of nowhere, as if he were thanking me for being there. And maybe he is, because I've learned that presence isn't just being in the same room. It's listening, observing, acting. It's loving with attentive eyes. Laura hasn't disappeared from our world. She continues trying from afar to reverse the story, sending letters, indirect messages through relatives, small veiled threats. But now she's dealing with a version of me she never knew, a father in a state of permanent vigilance. Everything is documented, given to the lawyer, filed away, not out of revenge, but because I know that if I let my guard down, she'll come back, and the cycle begins again, and that I won't allow. Protecting Noah has become my purpose, and that also includes protecting the space of peace we've built together. Recently, Noah wrote an essay at school. The topic was someone I admire. He wrote about me. He talked about my shield dad, the nights I told him made-up stories to help him forget his nightmares, and how now he sleeps with the door open because he's no longer afraid. The teacher called me to show it to him. She read the text aloud with tears in her eyes. I only managed to hear half of it before excusing myself. I left the room and cried in the hallway. Not from sadness, but because I knew that, even with all my flaws, I was the father he needed to be saved. Today we live a simple, but real life. No secrets, no lies. Noah knows he can speak, that he will be heard, and that he will never be silenced again. There is still much to heal, many gray days to face, but now he no longer faces anything alone. I look back and think of all the times I almost kept quiet, almost believed I was exaggerating, and I am grateful for having listened to my instinct, because sometimes all a child needs is for someone to see what no one else is seeing, and to have the courage to act, even if it destroys the illusion of a perfect family. Ending this story isn't easy. It still lives on in every little act of care I give my son, in every word he says to me without fear. But I leave my testimony here so that other fathers, other mothers can open their eyes before it's too late. A child's silence may seem peaceful, but sometimes it's the loudest sound of a cry for help. And today I know it was that silence that saved my son, because it forced me to listen. And for that reason I will never again ignore silence. Never again.